Trekking poles, why do you use them? These actually help support your knees. It improves your balance, especially if you're trekking over snowy fields. We're in an Oregon forest right now, and you can see trails, and there are sticks and things to trip on. And instead of 2 feet, which are, pretty good, using trekking poles, you actually get 4 feet, so you got that super cat balance, but still walking upright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how my particular poles work, but this will translate to how your poles work. There are 2 types. There are the telescoping type, where you twist and you expand, and there are also fixed type of trekking poles. I'll put links below to Black Diamond and Lecky, and that way you can go and click and check them out on Amazon and see what you think. I mean, whether you choose telescoping poles or fixed poles, that's simply up to you. Most people choose telescoping poles because of the 2 or 3 reasons I'm going to show you. So the first thing that you do, I'll set this pole down, is that you telescope out the bottom half, or bottom, I guess, third. You don't want to go past the max mark. Let me show you there. All trekking poles, here, let's look over here. Yeah, all trekking poles have some sort of mark telling you you've gone too far. If you extend them past there, you can actually break them, so you don't want to do that. So what I do is I extend the bottom pole here, and you just lock it down, whether it's a snap, lock, or twist. And then you twist the second section, expand it out to a height. We'll figure that out in a moment. And then you lock it down, and you're ready to rock. So let me do that with both poles. Now, one of the things for me is I like to have mine exact. And so I always spend just a little bit more time getting these things measured out. Just because when the poles aren't exact, it kind of drives me nuts. I don't know why, but it's just a thing. So I just expand them out, and that's dependent on the type of lock mechanism you have, whether it's a twist, a click, all sorts of crazy things on the market now. So here we go. I've got my poles, we're ready to rock. They've extended out. So the first thing when you're doing and you're setting your poles is you start, let's say you're on level ground. So when you're on level ground, let's come over here. All right, so I'm on pretty level ground. So what happens is you want the trekking pole to be set so your arm is at 90 degrees, okay? So let me set this pole down. So if I lower the pole and put it way down and the pole's like this, my arm's extended quite a bit. For level ground, this isn't very efficient because you have to push down a lot to make it work for you. So you want to raise that pole up until your arm's 90 degrees. You don't have to get a protractor out. You don't have to be a nut about it. But just about 90 degrees is a very good starting point for the pole. Unfortunately, I've seen other people where they put their pole like way, way up. Let me extend it and I'll show you just what it looks like. Where people hold the pole where it's way higher than 90 degrees, or I've seen like short people, they'll have even longer poles and they're literally walking like this, where they're too high. That you don't want to do that because it becomes extremely difficult to use. You won't be able to keep your balance with them when they're this high. It's kind of dorky and irritating. You'll give up and you'll start dragging them. Yeah, no fun. So that's tip number 1, is put the trekking pole so that it is at 90 degrees. So let me adjust here till it's at 90 degrees for me. There we go. Cool. And then I will simply set the other pole at the same height. They're both at the same height, and we're ready to rock. So that's tip number 1, is when you set your trekking poles for level ground, you want to have the pole so your arms are at 90 degrees. Totally works. It's the best option if you don't do anything else. If you are purchasing fixed poles, which I'll have a link to the Black Diamond fixed poles, you're going to need to go into a store or do some sort of measurement, because if you buy the fixed poles that are too high or too low, it's going to be a problem. So the fixed poles are starting to become popular, and you get that length and you're set there. The second tip is how you use this strap. I see a lot of people with the strap just flopping around, going along, but what happens when you snag the pole? Oh, fudge. Now you got to stand up or squat down, grab the pole, keep going, and eventually these things start driving you nuts. So here, let me show you these guys. All trekking poles come with some sort of wrist strap, whatever it might be. So your first inclination is just to put your hand through there and grab the poles, and then you're ready to rock. The problem is when you let go of these things, it can be a problem, because you can actually snag, trip, and then actually knock yourself down. And also just the way you're holding them, it's not as efficient. Plus when you're dragging them, they tend to come up away from your hand, so they'll actually drive you nuts. So if you just want to drag for a moment or pick it up, they'll just fall away. So the second tip is how you actually hold the strap. I know it sounds totally trippy, but there is actually a way to do this. So instead of just putting your hand naturally through and grabbing,
it's like
here, let's come over here, because I'm in the light. Okay, good. Mine are
very close, but
all right.
is this okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Switching totally.
No, that's good. All right. We made an adjustment to the camera because the light was making the camera look bad. Okay. So just by putting your hands through, that's a natural inclination. And I know it's totally weird, but the natural inclination is not what you want to do on this one. Instead, what you want to do is come up through the strap, put your wrist forward and grab. Okay, and see that's just my natural mode now. I've done it for so long that it's really hard for me just to go through and grab the pole, or my straps being kind of useless. Instead, you get the strap set here, you put your hand up through, and then you grab the strap like this. The reason for that is because if you have a momentary stumble, you snag something, it's actually very easy to get the pole back under control so you can start walking. So if I had my hand through here and I let go, I lose control of the pole. Versus, excuse me, allergic to the woods here. So see the difference between having my wrist up through the strap versus just holding through. When I let go, no big deal, but when I'm walking, this allows me more control and a better grip on the pole compared to putting my hand through there. So you always put your hands up here, and also instead of having to hold the pole a lot and constantly where you've got to use grip to hold this thing, by putting your hands up here, you can actually do what's in cross-country skiing parlance called the teacup hold, where it takes very little effort, just a little teacup, if you're in English tea room drinking your tea, by putting your hand through the strap, you actually have more control, and it's much, much easier to hold on to these things when you're walking. So that brings up tip number 3. When you're walking with your trekking poles, you don't want to have them forward. So I'll get back from the camera. So you don't want to walk and have them forward like this, because what is that doing? That's slowing you down. So you're actually pushing against yourself. So I know hiking is hard enough already, and backpacking even harder, and trekking and exploring even crazy. But the last thing you want to do is slow yourself down. So instead, here, let's move this. There you go, move that branch. And you don't even really want to walk with your poles perfectly upright, simply because they're not doing much for you. They're giving you some balance, which is good, but they're not as efficient as they could be. So the third tip on how to use these trekking poles is when you're walking, you've got the 90-degree position, but you will actually put the trekking poles slightly behind you to give yourself some lift. So let me walk over here. So as I'm walking, I'm not doing this because it's really freaking annoying. It feels like I'm in a giraffe. I don't know what being a giraffe feels like, but it feels like I could be a giraffe. So you don't want to do that, right? It's just totally awkward. I want to give myself forward thrust. I want to actually be able to do this sort of thing and cover some miles. I mean, I love the forest here. It's an experience, but I want to make it a better experience. So instead, I put the poles behind me and I use them to give myself a little bit of lift an extra thrust. And again, this motion actually may not be natural for some people. I've got a sticker in my sock already. Yeah, so when you're walking, it is just oddly enough not natural to have the poles behind you. It's actually natural to have them slightly in front of you. And I don't know why that is. That's how I started with trekking poles too, but it totally doesn't work, people. So when you're walking, you have these things behind you and you give a little thrust and all of a sudden it feels so much easier to walk. Now that's the huge advantage again of putting your hand up through the wrist strap and holding here, is it's so easy for me to do a little bit of pushing. If I just put my hand through the pole, like I showed you before, the way you don't want to do it, and I'm doing this, I'm constantly having to hold on to the pole because it's easy to lose control of these things. And then your hand flops around and it's really irritating. So instead, when I put my hand up through and through here, and I come back, you'll see as I'm walking, it is so easy for me to just barely hang on to the poles. So if I stumble, I'm ready to grab, but I'm not wasting tons of energy power grabbing these things. It's so easy, I can almost leave my hands completely open and walk around with complete confidence. So obviously the ground here is covered in sticks and leaves, or not really leaves, but pine needles, and it's really lumpy. These trekking poles give me a lot of capability. So that third tip again, keep those trekking poles behind you and give yourself some forward thrust. And it makes all the difference in the experience of using these trekking poles. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to a hill and I'm going to show you tips 4 and 5, the more advanced user, of how to use trekking poles. So let's come on over here. We'll come to the little trail here. Looks like the forest got blown down or something. There have been some windstorms, so it kind of tore the place up. So obviously when you're going to go hiking, the world is not flat. We're looking downhill right now, I'm looking uphill, and the world isn't flat. So that's why one of the nice things about having telescoping poles instead of fixed trekking poles is that you can actually make adjustments for going up and downhill. Now, as I'm standing here, where my trekking poles are striking, I mean, behind me uphill is a little awkward. As I'm touching the poles uphill, you'll notice my arm is much closer than a 90-degree angle. So this is tip number 4. When you're going uphill, you can actually adjust the pole down until the uphill portion is at about 90 degrees, and then I lock my poles down here. All right, so I can just loosen them up. And this is for when you're going uphill for quite a ways. I mean, if you're just going over undulating terrain, I just leave my poles at a neutral flat ground stance. But for uphill hiking for a long ways, I will shorten my poles so that I still have that 90 degrees. So as I come up the hill, so yeah, just stay there, it'll be okay. So I'm coming up the hill, my poles are neutral here to slightly down, but as I'm going uphill, you can see that my poles, they're even, as steep as this is, they're even slightly too high for me. So for that much steep ground, and if I was going up a trail that steep, first of all, I'd probably be swearing up a storm because that's really steep. But this is what I do. Now again, this is not something you want to spend a ton of time constantly changing. Like, oh, I'll get a tweak in an inch. You're going to drive yourself nuts. You're going to, throw your poles into the woods and catch the tree, and you're going to get irritated. Watch out for the tree there. So for ground this steep, I really shorten the pole where it's pretty low on me. But going uphill, it totally works. Okay, so that's tip number 4 on these things is when you're going uphill, you're going to shorten those poles quite a bit. And again, that wrist strap technique, and I know I'm emphasizing this a lot, but it makes all the difference where when I'm going uphill, I don't even really have to grab the poles at all to save myself energy. I can even keep my hands, I wouldn't say completely open, but it's easy. So that's tip number 4, is when you're going uphill, shorten the poles and it makes it easy. What's the obvious thing you gotta do for tip number 5, people? That's right. When you go downhill a lot, now there are 2 philosophies on this. Typically, people extend their trekking poles a lot, so they're naturally a little bit higher. And let me set these exactly the same, lock that down. So when I'm going downhill, the poles are much longer, so I can actually slow myself down. Now, this is the one place where you don't want to put the poles behind you for thrust unless you're like running away from a grizzly bear or a mountain lion. Of course, you don't run from either, because then they'll think they want to chew you, so that's another thing. But downhill, I don't ever put my poles behind me, because gravity is already helping me go down the hill. And you can see that. And also you can see once I've got these poles really tall, going uphill is really, really awkward. Okay? So the downhill technique is you extend the pole quite a bit, so you can just help slow yourself down, catch your balance. I mean, I don't know how many times I've eaten it with a backpack. I was filming out in the Idaho wilderness. I slipped on something, and of course I didn't have my trekking poles, and I slid down, almost fell off a cliff. That was exciting because I didn't have my trekking poles. So these things definitely would have saved me, because this particular surface is very grippy, if you will. It's not sticky, but in the Idaho wilderness I was in, the trail was complete dirt and it had little pea gravel on it. It was like walking on ball bearings. And so if I would have had my trekking poles, I would have been able to balance a little bit more. Now, I would say, I said 5 tips, but I'll give you a couple more slick ones. So we'll call this tip number 6. Hopefully I'll remember to put this in the video. When going downhill, I don't actually lengthen my poles, and I'll show you why. So let me set them neutral again. So this is my Aaron super secret trick. I've done this a lot simply because of the nature of mountaineering and trekking, is actually I keep my poles neutral unless I'm going uphill for a long, long time. But when I'm going downhill, I personally don't extend them. This is the advanced edition. So when they're short, it's really irritating. You almost have to lean over, and that drives you nuts. But what I do when I'm going downhill is I actually put my hands on top of the poles like a stick shift. You got to be careful, because now you're kind of losing control of the poles, but this allows me to actually put complete force on the poles and actually get a better control of myself when I'm going down. Now, whether you lengthen out the poles and do the traditional technique, or you put your hands on top and then clutch it, is totally up to you. But what I've found for me is that when I'm neutral and going downhill, like on flat ground and going downhill, I keep my poles neutral. And that way, whether I'm going flat, it's easy, or I'm going downhill, I can make a quick adjustment without having to futz around with the telescoping option on my poles. And only going uphill a lot do I really just crank them down and short. And that's just my personal take on that. You know, that's something you have to be careful about, is to watch how you use them and all such things. But that's my super secret explorer trick, is instead of holding on to the grip, I put my hands up here just to go down. And it actually works incredibly well for me, because now, instead of having to use my wrists to break my fall or control my downhill approach, I actually put up here, so I can actually put a lot of load rather than relying on my wrists here. I actually found this on Denali, on Kilimanjaro, on Mount Elbrus, that I actually preferred this, so I could, the moment I went neutral, I didn't have to mess with my poles at all. So that was a nice trick. And Aaron's super secret adventure exploration 1 trick number 7 is not really about using trekking poles, but what you can use the trekking poles for. I wrote a book with Dr. Terry Williams. It's called Adventure Expedition 1, and we talk about trekking through the world and how to set up your first expedition. But you'll notice my trekking poles look like a mess, but you'll see this roll here, that's actually duct tape, and specifically Gorilla Tape. So one of the cool things about the trekking poles is that I have several spins, you can see that there, of, hopefully you can see it, but you get the idea, of duct tape on my trekking poles. So no matter where I am and what's going on, I've always got a little duct tape with me, so if I tear something or I need to make some sort of repair, I'm already set with this duct tape, and specifically Gorilla Tape. I'll put a link below. This Gorilla Tape, the best description I've ever had was, if you wanted to stick an Oldsmobile to the side of your garage, Gorilla Tape could actually do it. I use this in Antarctica, and it's so strong that ripping it with my fingers started to tear my thumbs apart. So super powerful. Check out the link below. Highly recommended, super secret trekker trick. Add that there and you'll always have some sort of duct tape with you for a repair. So those are my 5 plus 2 bonus, 2 bonus tips of how to use trekking poles in the forest, in the mountains. I guess you don't really kayak with trekking poles, but hey, you know, who knows? These help you cross streams, it helps save your knees. It'll help if you stumble, you catch yourself instead of eating it and shredding up your hands, which I've done without my poles a lot. My poles have saved me, I don't know how many times, trekking and adventuring, climbing and polar exploring.